The one that's not right.
Okay. Remember, quiz next week. I'm going to open it up on Tuesday and not for Friday. Right? So I'm going to have plenty of time. All right. Figure will apply again. Okay. I'll go over it again. I went over it Tuesday, but just in case. You get to use anything you want to there as long as you want. You get one opportunity. Okay. Make sure you're on a working computer. Make sure the electric's not going to go out. If you're worried about wasting your Johnny, okay? Another thing I'm going to give you guys a hint, use it as a study guide as well. You get to take as long as you want to write down stuff. Alright? Okay. Alright, so do we have any questions so far about what we went over on Tuesday? We good? Alright, so let's get started then. We're going to start with race versus ethnicity. Okay? Anybody know what the difference is between race and ethnicity?
Race is, characters
Yeah, race you can't choose it. It's externally imposed. Okay? Culture or ethnicity you can. Let's define ethnicity. It's one's ethnic quality or affiliation. It's voluntary. Okay? Self-defined. Self-determined. Alright? It's non-hierarchical. Okay? So we don't have a hierarchy on ethnicity as we do on race. Okay? Usually it's a pretty equal ground there. Alright? There's not a whole lot of power differences in ethnicity. It can be multiple and based on cultural differences and not physical ones per se. Okay? So if I sat here and I asked each one of you to write down 5 things about yourself, you might say one of those 5 things must be part of your ethnicity. Okay? So we'll get further into that. But let's talk about the differences, okay? Race, like I just said, it's externally imposed. Okay? Other people define your race. We've already talked about how the government defines race, how we as a society define race, and we categorize people in races, okay? It's involuntary. You can't choose your race, alright? Usually based on physical differences. Talked all about that on Tuesday. Hierarchical. Talked about that as well. We'll get more into that today. It's exclusive. Okay? Usually you can't be a part of more than one race. Okay? There's usually only one race. Alright? Okay? And it's unequal. We'll talk about the inequalities again today. Ethnicity is voluntary. You get to choose who or what group you affiliate yourself with. And we're going to get into some of that as well. Okay? It's self-defined. You choose who you affiliate or what group you affiliate with. Okay? It's fluid and multiple. Right? You get to choose again, and you can identify with more than one ethnicity. It's cultural and planar, which means less about unequal power. Okay? It's all on the level playing field, basically. All right. Any questions about that? Good. Okey-dokey. So with ethnicity, we have symbolic ethnicity. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit through here. It's a nationality, not in the sense of carrying the rights and duties of citizenship, but of identifying with a past or future nationality. Let's see here. There's no risks of stigma and no pleasure of feeling like an individual. That's for people who identify with a white ethnicity. Okay? Any questions about that? Any thoughts or comments? Like if you identify with white, you don't have to worry about race or inequality or anything like that. It might be a little bit. Okay. But we talked about Native Americans and the last of Native Americans, okay, or Native in our population. And we saw that there was an increase of these populations within the U.S. Now, was not due to like a baby boom within those cultures or anything else like that. Can anybody guess why that population increased?
More people claiming heritage.
More people were claiming their heritage. Yes, more people were starting to identify with those ethnicities. Okay? We know that if you identify with as a Native American, that you might get benefits to the government. Right? I mean, even in school, you get some paid for it and everything else if you have such percentage. Right? But more people were starting to identify with their heritage. And that's why we saw that increase. Let's see here. Although whites have to choose the choice to choose their ethnicity, okay? White people, you get to choose if you want to German, Irish, whatever you want to identify with, okay? There are groups who cannot because of their race. And I have them listed. Now, these are all of them. But African Americans, Asian Americans, Latin Americans, can anybody tell me why they can't choose their ethnicity? Why is it externally imposed on these groups of people? Basically defined by their physical appearances. Okay? So we categorize them as ethnicity as well, and we'll get into that too. Okay. So let's get into the different types of ethnicities here in America. Now, these are only a few groups, it does not cover everybody. But let's talk about the Native Americans. We know in history that they were overrun by the Europeans, right? They took them out of their land, you know, all that fun stuff. You know, trying to take their culture, trying to assimilating them to European lifestyles, right? Okay? So therefore, we were trying to take away their ethnicity. The Indian Bureau was established in 1824. This does not sound like it, though. To me, when I first learned about it, I thought, oh, it's somebody that's there to help them. Nope, it was not. Okay? They were there to help them assimilate, or we'll get into assimilation here in a little bit, but that is to completely take on the majority culture or ethnicity. Okay? And so that was, we were there to assimilate them. All right, they wanted the Native Americans to be just like the Europeans. Okay, we know that throughout history, right? We don't need to get too much into it, but we see where their ethnicity does come into play and was really beneficial for us, such as in World War II. We had Navajo men who were code speakers. Have they ever heard about this before? Okay, well what they would do is they would, you know, give orders or speak about what was going on and strategies and things like that in the Navajo language. Okay, so other people or other countries and things like that couldn't listen in and decipher as easily. Okay, so that was really beneficial for us, and we really enjoyed that part of their ethnicity and their culture. Okay, that was really good for us. But now we move forward, we're going to say today there's about 2.8 million Native Americans in the U.S., and only 1/3 of them live on federal reserves. There's over 200 federal reserves in America. Okay? Have you guys heard of the federal reserves and stuff like that before? Okay, you watched Twilight? You should. Okay? Alright. But these people are plagued with things that white people have kind of done to them. And we'll get into that even more so. So we'll leave it at that. But they are plagued with health problems, domestic abuse, substance abuse, poor infrastructure, and high crime. Here in a little bit, we'll talk about how white people have discriminated, oppressed, and marginalized groups systematically and on purpose. Okay, that's later on. I don't want to get into it too much, but remember that. They also have the lowest average SES. You guys remember what SES is, right?
Socioeconomic.
Yes, socioeconomic status. Okay? You guys remember what that is? Yeah? Okay. All right. In the last decade, though, we saw the population increase by 18.4%. And again, that's because more people are starting to identify with that ethnicity. You know, they're claiming that heritage. So that's good. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about African Americans. Before the American Revolution, Slaves made up more than 20% of the colonial population. Today, African Americans only make up 14%. My reaction to that was I thought that was really, really low. Anybody else have the same reaction? No? Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Okay, I thought it was really low. Your book points out that like the Japanese American, remember we talked about them on Tuesday, the minority group has high rates of poverty, health problems, unemployment, and crime. Again, remember this for later on in the lecture. They're overrepresented in the criminal justice system, jails, prisons, probation, and parole. We talked about that when we talked about crime and things like that, right? Remember those statistics? Again, remember this here for a little bit. Let's see here. However, we are seeing more Africans enter the country now today than we have since before the slave trade and all that fun stuff, right? But more than 8% of black population in the U.S. is foreign born. That was interesting to me. It's just, my nods, yeah, that's interesting, right? Okay. However, these immigrants that are coming in are not assimilating to the culture, the American culture here. Okay, they're trying to keep their own culture. They don't want to assimilate. They want to maintain their roots. Okay, and again, we'll get into that. So let's get into Latinos. These people are Latin or Hispanic origin. Okay, we group a lot of people in Latinos. Okay, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic. There's many other places that these immigrants come from, and we consider them just Hispanic. Okay. In 2010, we made approximately 16% of the U.S. population, and it's rapidly increasing. And guess what? That's more than the African American population now. Okay? Their reason for coming here is economic. I think we've all heard about that before, right? Okay, don't need to go into that too much. Okay. However, just like we talked before about how definitions of race and ethnicity and things like that are always changing, so are the classification for Latinos. Okay? At one time, they were considered white. Okay? They were considered underneath that umbrella as being white. Now, they're considered as being a separate race. Again, as we get further on into the lecture, we'll see that experts predict that they will again be underneath the umbrella of white. Okay? And again, we'll get into that. They were once welcomed into our country, which is something different than what we experience today, right? Okay? We see all kinds of stuff about border patrol and all that great stuff, right? But at one point, and I highlight Fidel Castro because he was trying to get communism and stuff to rule there. And so people were fleeing. And we welcomed these people into our country. But that faded. In 1995, that idea changed. And now, not so much, okay? And back then, when they were coming from this, communist kind of, rule, these people had higher SES statuses, okay? They were middle class, upper middle class. Now, that's changed. Okay, now they're coming from more impoverished kind of backgrounds and things like that. So that might have a factor into our mode of welcoming, I guess you could say. Okay, so let's get into Asian Americans. This again is very broad. Okay, basically we include almost anybody from Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Right now, they're currently in a second wave of immigration, and they're well educated and very skilled. Okay, you guys have heard that the Asians are always better at math and all that fun stuff, right? That's a positive stereotype they have, so that's good, and we'll get into that a little bit. But it wasn't always like that. Okay, in 1902, Chinese were banned from entering our country. Okay, they were the first group that we've done that to. Okay, so that kind of marked a step there. They were marginalized and victimized when they were here. Okay, Chinatowns. You guys have heard of like Chinatown in New York and all that. Yeah, they're fun places to go, but where are they located in the city? In ghettos, yeah, they're pretty impoverished areas. And that's because they were so marginalized and victimized in the press and everything else that they were impoverished and they had to come up with some way to make money. So that's how these Chinatowns came about. Okay? And now everybody likes going, but that's not how it always was. Let's see. Then the Japanese were barred in 1924 from entering. Okay? We wouldn't allow them in. Today, well, not today, in 2010, so 4 years ago, the Asian population made up about 4.8% of the U.S. population. They have high average SES statuses. Okay, so they're very well educated. Okay, they attain these higher statuses through their education and the work that they do and things like that. And for example, they make more money than white families. They make considerably a lot more. If you look here, income families in 2010, or income for white families in 2010 was $49,445 compared to Asian Americans, which is $64,000. It's almost a $50,000 difference. Pretty big deal. That's a really big raise for people. Okay? But not all Asian Americans share in that wealth. Okay? We do have some groups of Asian Americans that have experienced high poverty rates, which is your Cambodians and your Hmong. One thing, though, that Asian Americans experience more than other groups is that they're fired from a job, or they're let go, if they quit, or something like that. It's very difficult for them to be rehired. And I thought that was different. Okay? Alright. Middle Eastern Americans, okay, they come from diverse places again. Okay, there's so many places that we consider Middle Eastern Americans here. Okay? Their numbers have swelled since the 1970s. Okay? The largest Middle Eastern population is from Iran, and they are not Arabs. Okay? They are actually Persians. And remember when we talked about them last week, or Tuesday. Okay? We have grouped them all together, even though that's wrong, right? And we victimize them because of the way they look. But, like I said, most of them are Persians. Okay? And they usually don't speak Arabic. Let's see here. There's a bunch of different negative stereotypes with Middle Eastern Americans. We talked about those a little bit on Tuesday. The biggest one right now is extreme terrorism, that they are extreme terrorists. Not all of them are, guys. We know that it's very small population of them that are. Very, very, not even statistically, important. Alright. So now let's get into why is it so important to be white in our country. Because we know, we've talked about it, that there's a lot of advantages being white in our country. Okay, and we get into that. Let's see here. Most white people have little awareness of the meaning of whiteness as a category. Meaning, you don't have to identify with your race. Okay? In fact, if I did have you guys write down 5 things that, make up you, I bet a majority of you guys wouldn't write down anything that was pertaining to ethnicity. Okay? Majority of white people don't. Okay? We have this person, Nell Urban Painter. He says the foundation of white identity is that there isn't any. You're just an individual. Okay? You might have some German heritage, or you might have some Irish or Scottish or whatever, but that's not what you identify with most times. Right? I come from a very, very, very heavy background of German. Okay? In fact, my mom's maiden name was Rocksterman. You can't get much more German than that. Okay? But we don't identify with it. We celebrate one German holiday, and that is it. The rest of the year we forget that we're Germans. Okay? We don't. And that's how a lot of white people are. Let's see here. Peggy McIntosh. She developed this list. Okay? And if you look on page 346, it lists only some of these 50 things that white people have advantages of in their daily lives. Okay, and she calls it the daily effects of white privilege. We see it every single day. Okay, being white means that you don't have to think about race at all, and calling awareness is to help whites see how safe the place really is. Okay, because if you're white, I mean, you just go about things on a daily basis, and everything's great, and everything's good, because everything seems cute, right? I mean, this country was founded with white Europeans. So everything's been geared towards whites. We've never had to fight the general white population. We've never really had to fight for freedoms and liberties and things like that within our country. Okay, such as other groups. Let's see here. And this is an example of when we bring about white studies, okay, how it can sometimes have a very negative impact. The positive impact that we want is for people to realize, that it's not an equal playing field. It's definitely, very, very unequal, okay? But David Duke, has anybody heard of David Duke before? No? He was the Grand Wizard, or the leader, of the KKK, okay? He left the KKK to start a new movement that was more politically correct. And in that movement, he tried convincing everyone that white heritage was actually a minority and it was suppressed. And that we needed to promote white heritage. And what do you think some of the impacts could have been from him doing that? Why do we say that's negative?
Just not true.
It's not true. Well, yeah, that's true. It's not true. So what would have happened though? I'm sorry.
Like,
Hold on, I didn't hear you. What? The exact same things that have been happening throughout history, right? If we're sitting there and saying that, they're suppressed and, the possible outcome could be that, again, white heritage gets put up on the pedestal and, we're being suppressed because everybody else is having these civil rights movements and now these other movements that are, bringing them about, but whites are not. And that was his argument. Okay, that we were suppressing white culture and white heritage with all these other movements and everything. And you see where that can have some negative outcomes? We could possibly oppress other groups by doing that. Alright, so now let's talk about the wording of majority. And we talked about this, we're talking about when people immigrate into a new country or something like that, become a minority, and now they have to relate to the majority. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. So let's talk about some of these different ways of assimilation. There's straight line assimilation. And this is by Robert Hart. And I don't know if you guys remember him. We mentioned him at the very, very beginning of the semester. But he was pretty influential in sociology. But anyways, he created a linear mode of assimilation. Okay, how people became accustomed and became a part of the majority culture. Okay, that's assimilation. And when we say linear, we mean that it had to have a certain step. Okay. However, Milton Gordon said that that doesn't really account for everything, and he emphasized more of it. He addressed it further because he said, I can't just be this linear model that Parks put out. There's more to the assimilation. Let's see here. There's 7 stages according to Gordon. You have to assimilate with your culture, structural assimilation, so that means like your government and rules and policies and laws and all that you follow. Your marital assimilation, okay? Because if you're married in another country, you follow different rights of marriage and things like that. But if you come into America, we have a pretty traditional sense of marriage, right? So you have to assimilate that way. Identifying, okay? How do you identify with yourself? All right? You have to start identifying with that majority culture in order to fully assimilate. your attitude, behavior, civic assimilation, again, that deals with your behaviors and things like that towards your community, and your civic duties and things like that. So these are all ways that Gordon says you have to assimilate to become fully a part of that majority culture. How stressful would that be for somebody coming into this country? Because that's pretty much everything, right? I mean, you're assimilating everything, your beliefs, your past, your everything. But we know that there's more ways of assimilation. We know that not everybody assimilates in this way. We know not everybody adopts the majority culture, hands down, and does everything in the same way, right? Okay, we see it here in America. That's what we call a melting pot. Okay, so then we have primordialism, which is to explain the strength of ethnic ties, because they are fixed deeply or primordial ties to one's homeland culture, meaning that you still keep ties with where you came from. Okay, does that make sense? But you also get ties to the new majority culture that you're in. Okay, so you kind of have a little bit of identity there. You still keep some of your ties and everything else. Alright, so then we come to pluralism. Pluralism is simply the presence and engaged coexistence of numerous distinct groups in one society. Would you guys say that we were a pluralist society? Yeah, we are, aren't we? Yes. Yes, we are. We see a lot of different ethnic groups and cultural groups and things like that. We see parades for these different groups. They bring their religions. They, still associate with their homelands and everything else. So we see that. Okay. So now let's get into segregation and discrimination. Okay, this is the big one. So I think you guys know what segregation is, but the definition we're going to use today is the legal or social practice of separating people on the basis of their race or ethnicity. Okay? Extreme cases would be here in America before the Jim Crow laws. We saw segregation like crazy, right? Separate bathrooms, separate drinking fountains, separate bus seats, separate schools. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Okay? But today, we're still seeing it, and I think you guys know that. But the biggest example of it is in our educational system, okay? And I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, we integrated everybody together. There isn't this, discrimination and segregation anymore in it. But it's so true there is. Before, when there were separate schools for whites and blacks, the government said that they're separate but they're equal, okay? So they said, the white school is getting the exact same resources, education, everything else as the black school is. Okay? Today, so let's move forward, let's go to about 10. Okay? Today, data shows that even though we're integrated in our educational systems and things like that, that minority children produce advantages over non-integrated school experience. Anybody know what I'm saying about that? That if a black child goes to school with both black and white kids, he's going to have more advantages than the black child that goes to simply an all-black school. And can anybody tell me some factors as to why?
Because they're exposed to different types of culture.
Okay, different types of culture, that could be a factor. What else? I'm sorry? More education, so more resources. What else?
You said a black child
Going to school with an integrated school.
black and white. Well, they would also have to deal with racism there too, because you'll still be prevalent.
Right, but they're more advantaged than the black child who just goes to an all-black school.
Right. What I'm saying is they'll have to deal with it if it's not very well.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from.
So
Yeah.
it can push them to be better.
Okay, so some intrinsic motivation there, but there's another one that I'm looking for. We're going to talk about in the next slide, and I want you guys to introduce it. So what am I looking for? If you think of an all-black school, where do we mostly see an all-black school nowadays? Inner cities. And what is the SES status in the inner cities? Low. Okay? That is a huge factor into the advantages and disadvantages of these schools. Okay? Because the more money that a community has, the more resources that school has.
That seems to be more of a debate about you get more advantages of going to a wealthy school than a poor school. It seems like more or less like you related the aspect of a black school to a white school, and then you've added on the black school would be poor. I mean, like, if you just went to two schools and the only difference between the school was one was mixed race and one was black, then probably the only difference would be exposure to cultures. I mean, on a large scale, but I mean, like, you can't really relate that the black school would be poor, because then we detract from the fact that, yes, a poor school would be worse off than a wealthy school.
I'm going to stop you because the next slide will talk exactly why these schools have less resources and things like that, and how we made it that way. Because you're exactly right, but we don't live in a perfect world where everything's on a level playing field. We've already said that. So let's get into that. So school segregation is invariably linked to poverty, which is linked to residential segregation. Who attended that lecture by Alice Kaufman? 2, 3? Yes, 4? Okay, yeah, I knew there was more in this conversation. In her lecture, she talked about the neighborhood, which was middle income. But who made up the neighborhood?
I'm gonna guess and say whites.
Nope.
No? Okay.
Who made it? You were there. Who made up the neighborhood?
I think it's me.
Yeah.
I came in there halfway.
Oh, there's a whole lecture was about it. What was the group that made up the neighborhood? It was African Americans. Yes. Okay? They were black people. And guess what? This neighborhood was not considered the ghetto, but it was next to the ghetto. And she talked about how they over-policed in this neighborhood because they were mostly black, which took out their resources and everything else. It became a drug economy. We'll get into that as well. But it oppressed them. Okay? And if you went to the lecture, you'll be able to relate a bunch of this to this. But it's residential segregation. Okay? Let's get into that. It's a structural linchpin of American racial inequality. And what do we mean by residential segregation? We know that there's neighborhoods that have white people, there's neighborhoods that have black people, there's neighborhoods that have, Irish heritage, there's neighborhoods that have German heritage. Who's ever heard of Over the Rhine in Cincinnati? Yeah, they were made up of mostly German people. That's why it's called Over the Rhine. Okay? That was a German community. There's all kinds of them in Columbus and everything else. But your book focuses on the difference between white and blacks. Okay? So in this, we talk about the residential segregation between white people and black people. And they say when you live in the ghetto, your chances of landing a good job for your social network are indeed slim. Okay? You guys remember about networks? Your networks are people who help you get jobs and move forward and progress and everything else. And when we talk about ghettos, what are some factors in ghettos? What are some characteristics of the ghetto?
No jobs.
No jobs. What else?
Violence.
Drugs, violence, all that kind of stuff. So that's who you're networking with. What's going to happen?
They're going to be.
That's what you volunteer to, right? I mean, the chances are pretty big chances, and because of that, we impose what's called also culture of segregation. Okay? Living in the ghetto means poor health, joblessness, out of wedlock children, welfare, educational failure, a drug economy, crime and violence, and social and physical deterioration. Okay? Because if you don't have the resources, your health deteriorates. Okay? If you're living in a crime-ridden area, you know, you might become a victim of a crime. That could greatly affect your health. You know, your immunity is deteriorating because there's no resources. You know, people can't keep up with their homes and things like that because they don't have the resources to. The school educational system, there's no money to fund them. So their resources are low. They don't have books, they don't have computers, they don't have these things that these other communities have, which progress their education. Okay? So we have two researchers and experts, Massey and Denton. They studied together, and they argue that the ghetto was deliberately and systematically constructed by whites to keep blacks locked into their unequal places. What theory does that sound like? Starts with a C. Conflict. Sounds like conflict theory, right? We want to keep them down in their places. Okay? And let's talk about that. So their argument is that structural changes such as industrialization, urbanization, the influx of immigration, of African Americans from south to north and the west, increased hostility and violence towards blacks. Because when they started moving to these other areas, what happened? They were taking huge jobs. Yeah. They were taking those resources. Okay? They're not taking them, earning them. Alright? Okay, so they found themselves shut out of both white jobs and white neighborhoods. And this hardened the boundaries between white people and black people. Okay? Did we talk about it this one? Hold on, let me go through. I do want to bring it up though. Did you guys know, and this is a way that we discriminate against black people today, and it's very systematic, that when a black family moves into a neighborhood, and this was also in the lecture, that when a black family moves into a white neighborhood, property values increase. Have you guys ever heard that before? That is a true fact. Okay? Horrible fact, but it's true. Okay? So that's one way that black neighborhoods are policed by white people. Okay? If the property values are down and decreased, you don't want to move into that neighborhood because there's not so many resources and things like that. Okay? Systematic discrimination there. Okay? We do it to a bunch of different groups. But, this was first done with the policing. This was first, and I'm not talking about policing, I'm talking about your general white society policing these groups. It was first done with violence. Okay? What's that movie with Denzel Washington where he's a football coach? Remember the Titans? Remember the Titans. What happened when he moved into the white neighborhood? And had the nice house and everything else. They threw bricks through the windows. That was violence right there. Okay, they were policing them right there. They wanted them to move out of the neighborhood. Okay, that's a form of policing there. And then again, with housing discrimination. Okay, we see it today with, say, the upheaval and removal of black people from certain neighborhoods, because where we already said, you know, that the majority of these individuals experience poverty and things like that. The government has housing benefits and things like that, right? But subsidized housing, which is all in low-income areas. So think about that. Okay. But now we're saying there's even a newer form of segregation. Okay? And that's in the criminal justice system. And we talked about it. Okay? But in history, blacks didn't overrepresent in this population. Hispanics and Latinos didn't overrepresent. You know? White people were in jail and everything else just as much, committing as many crimes and everything else. But today, we see so much more overrepresentation of black people in jails or that are incarcerated. And we talked about it. There's a theory, we talked about it in our crime chapter, crime of deviance. Anybody kind of remember what I'm talking about?
Is it, if they say you're a criminal, start coming from more?
That could be part of it, labeling theory. Yeah, because you're in this neighborhood that has no resources and everything else, and you're networking with these people who are deviant drug economies and violence and everything else. So yeah, maybe that is something that's reflected upon you. But what about if you have more rules and you're being over-policed? You have more rules to break, which means there's a bigger chance for you to be incarcerated, right? Okay? In that lecture that some of you guys attended, she talked about how even though this was a middle-income neighborhood, they were all black. Okay, well not all, mostly black neighborhood. And even though they weren't part of the ghetto or anything else like that, they started over-policing there. Okay? They put a lot more police units and everything else. And at first she said they welcomed them. Okay? Because they thought, yes, this is great, going to keep everything in line. Until they realized that these police officers were pretty much going after anything and anything. Okay? And then when they went on probation or got out and went on probation or whatever, then it was a matter of just a little bit and they were back in. Okay? So is that a form of why we have this new type of discrimination or segregation? It's a big part of it. Okay? Alright, what about the drug laws? Remember what we said about ghettos? What about drug laws? How does that impact the overrepresentation of black and Hispanics in these incarcerated populations?
Well, if you have a lot of drug trafficking and crimes due to law, or crimes due to drug use, then obviously that's going to impact those communities more than anything else.
You're right, yes, because we just said in ghettos they have drug economies, right? I mean, they have to do something to make a living because they don't get jobs or anything else. They've got to do something. So, if there's all these new laws about drugs and everything else, then of course they're going to get arrested. And they're being over-policed. So of course they're going to get caught and arrested. And then again and again and again and again. And it's a vicious, never-ending cycle. And it was systematically done. Okay? And did you guys see that NPC you can smoke weed now? Yeah. Alright. So let's talk about racial conflict. Okay? And we bring up the Rwanda genocide. Alright? Racial conflict is usually what happens when you have two races that are in turmoil and conflicts and stuff like that for a really long time. And so basically, it boils over if something dramatic happens, such as the Rwanda genocide in 1994. Over 800,000 Tutsi, is that how you say it? Tutsi? Were murdered in 100 days. And that equals out to about 333.3 killings per hour. Okay? They talk about how, in this Rwanda genocide, how this racial conflict boiled over so much that in a matter of just overnight, friends became friends. Teachers killed students. Okay? Yeah, it's really impactful. I mean, genocide is the mass killing of a group of people based on racial, ethnic, or religious traits. Do we have any other examples of genocide?
World War II.
World War II, the Holocaust. Yes, and we'll get into that. Okay, so Rwanda is a stark reminder that when we speak of the myth or fiction of race, because remember we said it's socially constructed, we make up race, we define it, okay? That it's still a very huge reality in our social life. Okay? So even though technically it's a myth, it is as real as it can get. Okay? Alright. So let's talk about group responses to domination. We have withdrawal. A oppressed group may withdraw from that country or from that rulership or whatever. We saw that with Jewish people who fled from Germany and all that fun stuff. And we also saw it again with the Great Migration. Okay? The Great Migration was when African Americans fled from the South and moved to the North and to the West. Okay, so that's a form of withdrawal. We also have passing, which is blending in with the dominant group. Great example is Michael Jackson. Right? Yeah, yep, okay, I don't need to go to that. Also, there's changing your surname. Yeah, we change our last names. Okay? When America, settlers were coming in and everything else, most Americans are Germans. Okay? But they changed their last names. You don't hear your book says Muellers and Schmidts and all that. You hear Millers and Smiths. Okay? We change our last names and things like that. Just like my last name is Ruggles, my husband, if you saw him, you would know he's definitely Irish descent. He is like this tall, huge leprechaun. But his last name is Ruggles, so the last name before his Irish name is like Rubel or something, and there's a really crest and everything else, but when his family first moved over here, they changed the name so that they could fit in more. Okay. Alright, so then we have acceptance versus resistance. That is, well, let's talk about the subaltern. It describes a subordinate oppressed group of people. So basically what they do is they fake. They fake it. Okay? You remember front stage and backstage in dramaturgical theory? Front stage, you act in a certain way. Backstage, you're yourself. Okay? The waiters that come out and they're so polite and everything else, and they go to the kitchen and they're like brown plates and everything, and then they came back to table 9. They play the part, okay? But they actually resent that majority culture, or domination, or whatever you would call it. You see this. They studied African Americans in Philadelphia, okay? And they saw that they learned 2 different languages. And I'd say it happens more than that because we hear it all the time. They learn a street language, and then they learn the mainstream language, okay? And then they have to decide which one is appropriate for what situation they're in, which language they're going to use. But that is a form of acceptance versus resistance, okay? Because they're accepting the mainstream language in order to survive and thrive, but they have this alternate language that's theirs. Okay? There's a collective resistance, which is an organized effort to change the power hierarchy on the part of the less powerful group in society. We see this, we've seen it, okay? Civil rights movement is a part of that, a collective resistance. Genocide is a part of that, a collective resistance. Okay? Alright. Any questions about domination and all that kind of stuff? Or forms of ways to get out of domination? Alright, so now let's get into prejudice, discrimination, and the new racism. I think we get through this. Prejudice, thoughts and feelings about an ethnic or racial group. Okay? So you don't act on it, you just have these certain thoughts. Okay? Discrimination is harmful or negative acts. Okay? So you're a step further. You're not just thinking it now, you're actually doing stuff. Let's see here. They describe different types of people on their levels of prejudice and discrimination. You have the timid bigot, it's they have prejudice, but they don't discriminate. Okay. Then you have the fair weather liberal, who aren't prejudiced but discriminate. Anybody have an example of that? I'll give you one. An example of that would be a family or a person who says, I don't have any prejudices, I'm not, no racial, thoughts or anything else like that, but they won't move into a black neighborhood. That's discrimination. We see that also with employers. We see it again with housing discrimination. Okay, a banker might say, hey, I have no problems, I'm not prejudiced or anything else, but then will give a home loan to, a black family or, an Asian American family or anything like that. That would be a fair weather liberal. Active zygotes, which are both, are very rare to come across because due to prejudicial viewpoints are largely unaccepted. Yes?
There's not active bigots.
Oh, sorry, I was saying it wrong the whole entire time. You should have told me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Bigot, you're right. Okay. They're very hard to come across because in today, if you are prejudiced, you're kind of seen as like, right? I mean, that has a bad connotation to it. That doesn't mean that we don't deal with deal with racism and discrimination and everything. Okay? We also have a lot of laissez-faire racism. Okay? It replaces biology with culture. So we're no longer focusing on what you look like, your physical appearances, and things like that. We're talking about your cultural background. Okay? And what they're saying is that they presume or assume that there is something fixed, innate, and inferior about non-white cultures or cultural values. Do we experience that? Every single day, right? And that also kind of reminds me of another term, and it starts with an E. Ethnocentrism. Kind of sounds like that, right? Okay. And with this, they have negative stereotyping, tendency to blame non-whites for their problems. They have resistance to affirmative action, that people should be equal and everything else. Okay? So for them, black people live in the ghetto because that's their problem, right? We didn't make that happen, they did. That's their life problem, okay? Alright. So after the 1960s, we saw formal equality, right? With civil rights movements and everything else. Everybody was on a level playing field. We know that's not true, but it made it even more difficult to tackle racism and inequality. Why? Because now people weren't outwardly or systematically, supposedly, being discriminated against. Right? All the laws are fair, everything's good. Okay? You get to vote, I get to vote, everybody gets to vote, we all have rights to houses, property, and all that fun stuff. But we know that's not true. Okay? In our society, we know discrimination still happens, but now we can't formally tackle it like we used to be able to. Okay? We have more subtle forms of prejudice and discrimination. Think of the housing market. Okay? That's pretty subtle. It's hard to tackle that. Alright? And we see it in Europe. Their whole kind of form of discrimination has changed. Because they follow this new colorblind kind of mentality. But instead, they started discriminating against and having racism in cultural forms. Okay? So if you're a part of the culture, not very good in Europe, depending on what part you're in. Alright, any questions about that? Alright, let's pertain it to wealth. As we know in America, we're a very consumerist nation, right? And that deals with wealth. So, non-whites lag behind in educational attainment and income. Remember we said that in America, education is a huge gateway to have a higher income and more wealth. Well, these non-whites who don't have the opportunities to get this education and stuff like that, obviously lag behind. Blacks are less likely as whites to graduate from college, hold a professional or a manager position. Okay? They're more likely to be unemployed and die before the first year of life. That's a harsh fact. Okay? Really harsh. Because they don't have the resources. Let's see here. Net worth really shows the inequality in America. Okay? And you remember what net worth is, right? Your assets subtracted by your debts, okay? And then if you have a positive number there, that's your net worth, okay? And we really saw this during the crash of the housing market, and that was in 2008. Whites saw a 16% decrease in their net worth. Look at these other two numbers. African Americans experienced a 53% loss, and Latinos experienced a 66% loss in their net worth. That is a huge gap there. I mean, that's huge. Okay? In 2009, the median Latino family had only $6,000, or a little over $6,000 in assets. That's not very much. Okay? I bet a bunch of your guys' cars are worth more than that. Okay? 1/3 of them had zero or negative net worth. Their debts were even more than what they had. And that's huge. Okay. So we also see equity inequality has grown since the 1960s. Because we are suppressing them, right? Systematically putting them in places where there's no resources. Okay? It cannot be explained by income alone, because they have done research where they compared black families and white families who have the exact same income, and white families still have more net worth. All right. So let's talk about institutional racism. Institutions and social dynamics that may seem race neutral, but actually disadvantage minority groups. Again, property values, okay, discrimination in there. Hiring patterns by employers, we talked about that with, remember we were talking about felons and things like that, and white felons and black felons, and who got the jobs. Okay, that all falls in here. Alright, so we're getting near the end, guys, and we'll be finished with chapter 9. Alright, so the future of race. Experts are sitting here and researchers, and they're trying to figure out what it's going to look like. Okay? And there's different arguments and things like that. Racial and ethnic diversities in America will tend to increase. Because we talked about all, the immigrants coming in and, the second wave of Asian Americans coming in. And right now there's more Africans coming into the country and things like that. So we're seeing, more immigrants coming in, which brings our cultures from their ethnicities and everything else. By 2050, they predict that Latino and Asian populations will triple. Latinos will make up 25%, and Asians will make up 8%. I think that's awesome. Okay? And what we see now, because we know in America that we have the black and white divide, if you're white, it doesn't matter what ethnicity or where you come from or anything else, you're white, and then you got black people, okay? That's our two main categories in America. They're saying in the future that that's going to change again, okay? Because remember, before that, back in history, they kept changing the definition of white and everything else. They're saying that's going to happen again. That's what they predict. And they predict that it might become the white and non-white divide. And again, are you seeing the advantages of being white? Okay. Alright, but will African Americans still be discriminated against? Of course. Because they will again fall into that non-white umbrella. Okay? And again, we say it because of their physical appearances. Alright? It's harder for us to discriminate against someone who's German or Irish or something like that. It's harder for us to tell, right? Okay, so think about that. But as long as blacks are present, a back door is open for non-blacks to slip under the white umbrella. Think of that physical appearance. And that's why. Okay? So what can we do about it? This part is not your book, okay? This is the social work side coming out. Alright, and anybody can do actual social work, okay? This is a time for us to start bringing awareness to this, okay? That lecture by Alice Goffman about the over-policing of black communities, black poor communities, is what she was talking about. That's bringing awareness. her research, she was able to take it to, where was that at? Chicago? Am I right? Who was there? Was it in Chicago?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Was it Philadelphia? Yes, it was Philadelphia. Thank you. She was able to take her research and her findings and everything to the police department of Philadelphia, and they are going to work with her, she said, on making policy changes and things like that. And it brought awareness to the discrimination that they were bringing to that neighborhood and to other neighborhoods, right? And it's things like that we need to do, okay? We can bring awareness on campuses, in a community, and, you know, anywhere about these issues, okay? To housing authorities, and, you know, just amazingly different ways, okay? We can bring up policies with policymakers and with legislators and things like that to really promote this awareness and try and start making changes. Now, is it going to make a huge difference? It might, okay? But that's something that needs to start happening, okay? And it starts with you guys, because you're getting educated, and it starts with educated people, okay? So that is the end of our lecture today. We will not be here. Oh, I forgot, Tuesday's a holiday. I'm not going to open up your screens on a holiday. Okay, so I'll open it up for you guys on Wednesday.